It takes less than a second. The bird hangs in the air just above your palm, wings beating, and then it lands. To you, it feels spontaneous, a small miracle that just happened. But in that half second of hovering, something else was happening that you never saw. The bird was running numbers. Your size, your stillness, the angle of your shoulders, whether you blinked, whether the seed in your palm was worth what it was about to risk. Most people think a bird landing on their hand is an act of charm, or luck, or some rare alignment of mood. It isn't. It's the output of a calculation one so fast it looks like trust, but is actually something far more demanding. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what your bird knew about you before it ever touched down. If you want to keep learning what's actually happening in the quiet moments in your yard, the ones that look simple but aren't, subscribe. Because this channel exists to show you exactly that. Most people assume the decision starts when the bird is close a few feet away. Maybe, right before it commits. It doesn't. Researchers who study this call it flight initiation distance, and what they've found is that the calculation is already running long before you'd ever notice the bird paying attention to you at all. A bird studied in Kathmandu Valley, where researchers tracked 33 species across both city parks and rural farmland, showed measurable assessment happening from many meters away, sometimes from a distance most of us would consider irrelevant, too far to matter. The bird disagrees. To a creature whose body weighs a few grams, every approaching shape is a potential threat until it isn't. And the assessment of you begins the moment you enter its field of view, not the moment you reach toward it. What the researchers also found is that this distance isn't fixed. It shrinks in cities and stays wide in the countryside, which tells you something quietly remarkable. The bird in your yard has already adjusted its calculations specifically for people like you, specifically for this place. It built a custom model of human risk, and you are a data point inside it. Here's something nobody tells you about being approached by a bird. You are, by any reasonable standard, enormous. Even the smallest backyard visitor, a chickadee, a wren is encountering something many hundreds of times its own body weight. And the research bears out exactly what you'd expect from that mismatch. Larger animals are read as more dangerous, full stop, and that single variable shapes the entire calculation before anything else about you is considered. But here's the part that should surprise you. Body size isn't destiny. It's a starting weight in the equation, not the final answer. A bird can override its instinctive caution about your size if enough other variables line up in your favor: stillness, predictability, familiarity. Which means every time a bird does land on you, it isn't because your size stopped mattering. It's because everything else mattered more, hard enough to outvote the most basic fear a small animal can have. Something big is near me. You've been told to stay still. What you probably don't know is why stillness works the way it does not as etiquette, but as raw data the bird is processing in real time. Movement reads as predatory intent. It's one of the oldest signals in the animal kingdom, and it doesn't care whether the movement is a hawk's dive or a human shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Both register the same way to a brain built to survive. What changes the calculation is duration. A bird isn't just checking whether you're still right now, it's tracking whether your stillness holds, second after second. Because predators that intend to strike rarely hold a pose for very long. The longer you remain motionless, the more your stillness stops reading as a held breath before an attack and starts reading as something closer to a landscape feature. You become less like a predator and more like a tree. Most people think they're being patient. What they're actually doing is feeding the bird a different category of information with every second that passes. This is where the calculation stops being purely instinctive and becomes something closer to personal. At a site overlooking Lake Tahoe, researchers from the University of Nevada, Reno's Chickadee Cognition Lab, led by Professor Vladimir Pravosudov, discovered something that complicates the idea that a bird is simply assessing a human in the abstract. The chickadees there have learned to land on outstretched palms for offered seed, and the scientists studying them found this wasn't blind habituation to people in general. It tracked with specific, repeated, low-risk encounters at that specific place. The birds weren't recalculating from zero with every new hand. They were drawing on accumulated history. Doctoral researcher Benjamin Sonnenberg, who has spent long hours with these birds at what's become known as Chickadee Ridge, put it simply, it's a wonderful experience when they fly around and land on your hand to grab food, but he's also careful to frame what's happening on the bird's terms, advising people to behave as though they're a guest in someone else's home. That's not a metaphor. It's closer to a literal description of what the bird is doing letting a known visitor into a space it controls. If you've ever wondered why one chickadee in your yard seems bold enough to nearly touch you while another never gets within 10 feet, you're not imagining a personality difference. You're observing one. Researchers studying black-capped chickadees found that individual birds show consistent, repeatable differences in how cautiously they behave after sensing potential danger. Some return to feeding quickly. Others wait far longer. And this pattern holds for that individual across different types of risk, not just one specific threat. In other words, your yard doesn't contain chickadees as a single uniform calculation engine. It contains individuals, each running the same basic math with a different risk tolerance built in. The bold one isn't fearless. It's running the identical equation as the cautious one, just weighting the variables differently, valuing the seed slightly more, or fearing the cost slightly less. What looks like a single bird being friendly toward you is actually a population of separate decision makers, and you happen to have met the one willing to bet highest. Most people don't know that the same bird, in the same yard, with the same human standing in the same spot, will make a different decision depending entirely on how hungry it is. This is one of the more elegant findings in the research on approach behavior. Caution and need exist on a sliding scale, and as a bird's energy reserves drop, the threshold for acceptable risk drops with them. A fed bird can afford to be choosy about which threats are worth the calorie cost of caution. A hungry bird cannot. This is part of why the calculation shifts across a single day sharper, more conservative in early morning hours when a bird's body has burned through the night's reserves and risk tolerance briefly tightens, then loosening as the day's foraging restores the balance. Your bird isn't a fixed personality you can predict once and rely on forever. It's a running total, recalculated hour by hour, and what looks like inconsistency on its part is really just honest accounting. Here's the uncomfortable truth most well, meaning backyard birders never hear. A bird does not reward kindness. It rewards predictability. You can mean every bit of warmth you feel toward the birds in your yard, and none of that intention enters the calculation directly. What enters it is pattern. Does this human show up at the same time? Does this human move the same way? Does this human, across dozens of encounters, never once turn out to be the threat the bird's instincts warned it about? Every uneventful encounter is a small piece of evidence the bird quietly files away. And trust, if you want to call it, that is really just the accumulated weight of evidence tipping the scale. This is why a stranger who happens to be naturally still can sometimes get a bird to land faster than a regular feeder of theirs who fidgets. The bird isn't judging your relationship. It's reading your data. By the time a bird actually touches down on your hand, the hardest part of the calculation is already finished. Everything that happens in that final second, the small hop forward, the brief wait on your fingers, the quick grab of seed is not the moment of decision. It's the execution of one already made. built from your size, your stillness, your history together. Its own hunger, its own particular nerve. What that means is something most people never let themselves fully feel. The bird wasn't surprised by you. It wasn't acting on impulse, or luck, or some passing whim of trust. It had already decided, using a process more careful and more individually calibrated than almost anything else in your relationship with the natural world, that you specifically were safe enough to risk this, not people in general. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles in once you understand this, the realization that every bird that has ever landed near you did so only after concluding, through its own careful arithmetic, that you had passed. Has a bird ever landed on your hand? Or come close enough that you felt it deciding? Tell me what happened. I want to know exactly how it unfolded, second by second.